So finally, the Elden Ring DLC Shadow of the Erdtree has been announced, and other than a name and an obscure image, that's about it. Now, instead of spending hours upon hours ruminating and pulling ideas out of absolute thin air for who's riding Torrent or what's going on with the Erdtree, we're instead going to focus on some much more tangible leads from data mining and leaks. As with any of From Software's previous outings, the most exciting thing about each game's DLC is its scope for exploring their source material's lore and narrative. Unused Miquella dialogue was unearthed by dataminers not long after launch. I'd love to see something that explores Miquella's story properly. The cursed brother of Melania plays a pretty integral role to, well, pretty much everything in Elden Ring, yet we actually don't know that much about him. Miquella is now in a permanent slumber, and you can actually find him in Mog's boss fight arena, inside an egg-like cocoon with one arm draped out of it. It's suggested in the game that it's better for Miquella to stay asleep. But what'll happen if he wakes up? That's the real question. The PvP Colosseums were previously uncovered by dataminers before release last December, so there's likely more areas in the vast world to be revealed. One that many people have noticed is that if you discover all Elden Ring Divine Tower locations, you'll see that they converge perfectly around a central point. It's not the Erdtree, as you might expect, but a section of inaccessible ocean in the very middle of the map, one covered and obscured by cloud. Seems suspicious. Perhaps in the DLC we'll blast that cloud away to reveal a new island. A quest for Elden Ring's Vike, the character who appears on the cover art, was apparently cut from the game. You'll probably recognise Vike as the kneeling knight on Elden Ring's front cover. He appears only briefly in the final game as an NPC invader and boss who rewards you with his unique armor set and spear for defeating him. But it seems a bit odd that a character with such a small role would appear so prominently on the cover art. Well, that's because he was originally a much bigger deal, with in-game lore explaining that no other Tarnished was closer to the throne of the Elden Ring than Vike. Elden Ring data miners have since uncovered a cut questline featuring Vike using some unused voice line, making reference to a knight in armor melting inwards. Unfortunately, no text or dialogue for Vike has actually been discovered, but the quest seemingly would have had a few dialogue choices and offered a handful of rewards, ultimately unlocking Vike as a summon in Stormvale Castle to help you fight against one of its bosses. It does seem really strange that such a prominent character with so much work put into it was cut, so here's hoping that future DLCs fill in some of the gaps. One of my all-time favourite things about Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is Reflections of Strength, a game mode that lets players challenge previously defeated bosses for a rematch. Not only does beating a particularly challenging boss more than once do wonders for your ego, it also helps players improve on the fundamentals that underpin games like Elden Ring. We also have evidence that Melania used to be even harder.
And I have never known defeat.
Hard to believe, I know, but data miners have discovered that Elden Ring's most notorious boss, Melania, used to be even more difficult to beat than she already is. By analysing and playing through the 1.0 version of Elden Ring, that is, a version that's been untouched by patches or changes since the original game, a modder discovered several key differences with her attack pattern and abilities, making her significantly more aggressive. The most notable change is that version 1.0 Melania uses her old waterfowl move that wasn't originally tied to any health loss, and a similar but different attack called Melania Blade, which could be chained, all while attacking more aggressively and blocking more overall. That alone sounds hellish, but the data miner goes on to detail other variations which include slightly different combos and increased use of the dreaded Scarlet Aenea incantation.
The scarlet bloom flowers once more.
An easy option for From Software would be to add in this harder Melania as a repeat boss option for greater loot in the DLC. And they could do it with other bosses as well. Imagine fighting all of your favourites all over again, but with an added twist.
When it comes to cut content in Elden Ring, there's one character whose dialogue in particular makes for an interesting dive into the game's lore: Godfrey.
To be granted audience once more.
YouTuber Sekiro Doobie discovered a selection of cut lines from Godfrey, and there are some interesting theories about what these new discoveries all mean. The dialogue seems to reinforce the idea that when it comes to the Elden Ring shattering, Marika may have originally had a plan in advance to shatter the ring, which Godfrey knew about all along. If Godfrey was aware that the Elden Ring would be shattered, then the banishing of the Tarnished was actually a plan to remove them from the Fingers/Greater Will's influence. The consensus seems to be that Godfrey was initially meant to play an even larger role throughout Elden Ring, with a potential storyline that would take place in the past based on the lines heard in Sekiro Doobie's video. There's nothing concrete here, of course, just guesswork reading between the lines, but there is a lot to theorize about with some juicy tidbits nestled with Godfrey's lost dialogue. One of Elden Ring's earliest merchants was originally part of a long-running, tragic questline before From Software scrapped it. Kale is the first merchant you stumble across in your adventures in the lands between. Remember an NPC dressed like Santa Claus? That's our guy. Aside from selling valuable items and offering some lore tidbits in exchange for chatter, you don't really get much else from Kale, as he remains rooted to the spot. However, the merchant was once tied to a tragic subplot of the game. Speaking to him further would have led to a mention of the Great Caravan, which was once home to merchants like Kale and something he yearns to find. Defeating Godric at Stormvale Castle would send Kale on a quest to find the Great Caravan, with certain clues left behind to help you find the merchant's new location each time he moved. This would have continued until you reach the subterranean shunning grounds beneath Lendl. This place is eerie enough and is home to the Three Fingers, which relates to one of Elden Ring's bad endings, but it's also littered with bodies. Some current in-game lore explains the bodies are all that remains of the merchant caravan after it was accused of heresy and burned alive, summoning the flames of frenzy and despair. In Kale's scrapped quest, he discovers the fate of his people and embraces the flames himself. A pre-release build of Elden Ring has a quest that lets you craft a Dream Brew that makes NPCs chatty and sleepy. Essentially, it gets them drunk. Prolific modder Lance McDonald released a video where they explore an earlier Elden Ring build that included content which was ultimately cut from the game and was able to uncover a whole questline, NPC, and other items which never made it into the final build. The quest involves a fully animated and voiced NPC named Jiko who's looking for ingredients to make his Dream Brew, which he explicitly says is a type of alcohol. Jiko says the Dream Brew will convince other NPCs to tell you their deepest, darkest secrets. If you agree to help him, Jiko gives you an item called St. Trina's Crystal Ball, which you use to collect dense fog of sleep from napping creatures. Bring the filled vial back to Jiko and he uses it to make his brew, which you can offer to NPCs to open up additional lines of dialogue and hidden lore. McDonald brings the Dream Brew to Merchant Kale at his shop inside Church of Ele in Limgrave, and after Kale drinks the brew, he falls asleep and has a nightmare about eyes being burned by a frenzied flame. Jiko then asks for 2 more vials of Dream Mist to make more Dream Brew, and it's then that McDonald discovers additional sleeping creatures, suggesting that this questline was pretty well formed before it was cut. Sure makes you wonder what other stuff was snipped from the final launch version, and if any of it is as fun sounding as getting NPCs drunk.
So what do you think we're going to see in Shadow of the Erdtree DLC? Let us know in the comments below.